Hey, do you wanna come round now? Say around 5:30.
Good morning. My name's David Madden. I'll be the sort of general host this morning. I'm one of the founding directors of Mustard, and so I will be curating, if possible, the questions and then moving on swiftly as we can. So there we go. Welcoming our guest speakers. Do we want to start with some introductions? Venetia, do you want to start?
Hi, thank you for having me. So my name's Venetia. I'm Sustainability Coordinator and Fitwell Ambassador at Resonate Interiors. I have been with the practice about a year and a half now. We are a boutique firm specialising in commercial office fit-outs, and my role within the firm is to carry out our ESG strategies both internally and throughout the projects.
Fantastic. That's great. Moving on to John.
Morning all. John Stinson, writer architecture. I'm lead for sustainability within the practice, which covers our practices in the UK, but also our alliances across the world and our practices in Canada as well. I merged a sustainability company into Writer about 9 months ago now, called Building Research Solutions. So our focus is very much on sustainable buildings and sustainable places, placemaking, that type of thing, working within and around building standards and building regulations and other kind of voluntary sustainability schemes and certifications to get the most out of our buildings, both new build and retrofit, and also for our green spaces, master planning, urban planning, that type of thing.
Fantastic. Vicky.
So thank you so much for having me today. Very excited to be here. My name's Vicky. I'm from Ziabia Events Consultancy, and we are an event management agency based in Bristol. And we work with our clients nationally and globally, support them with all of their events. So sustainability is really a key focus within our industry. It's one of the really hot topics at the moment. So at Ziabia, we've actively engaged a programme to make change by appointing a sustainability action squad, which we've called the Ziabia SAS, within the who devote considerable time to researching and implementing more sustainable practices. So some of the work that we're doing is around our travel, is around venues and our supply chain with sustainability, and also looking at minimising plastic waste and things like that.
Fantastic. Joanna?
Lovely to be here. My name's Joanna and I'm the founder of Trace. We're a climate tech platform that enable and empower SMEs to reach net zero. So we help them through the journey right from the beginning. Think of us as your virtual sustainability team, through to measuring and enabling you to track your metrics around sustainability, particularly carbon, and set targets and reach net zero whilst engaging your team in that process.
Fantastic. And then moving on, Jonathan.
Great to be here. I'm Jonathan Harris. I'm director in the Bristol studio of Chapman Taylor. So for those that don't know, we're a practice of architects, master planners and interior designers with 15 studios globally, including 3 here in the UK, London, Bristol and Manchester. My expertise is in designing and delivering complex urban mixed-use projects, creating places and buildings that are both creative and successful. I'm the outgoing chair of our Responsible Design Group, which is a group of passionate individuals located across our studios whose remit is to help deliver more sustainable outcomes through our projects and our operations.
Great, thank you. And then finally, Elena.
Morning. Hi, everyone. I'm Eliana Ennis. I'm a creative producer and sustainability manager at Noosa Studios. We're a small video production company based in London. And my role is to track all video projects' carbon emissions, primarily using AdGreen and other data sources, and then creating baseline reports for our company and formalizing all sustainability policies and strategies. My goal for kind of where this is leading to is to create some kind of educational resource or community that helps kind of smaller businesses, especially in video production, to learn how to integrate these sustainable practices into their businesses and kind of reducing those educational barriers.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So great to have you all on board and joining us today. So Earth Day, this year's theme, planet versus plastics. So as we all know, plastics are used across sort of everyday life, let alone the creative industries which we're all involved with. So from, as you can read here, from event production stands to laminate flooring, interior design, and everything for a building in terms of how it's delivered to site and so on and so forth. So discussing how businesses and individuals can implement the reduction of plastics used. Found it quite interesting to read earlier on about the 460 million estimated metric tons of packaging, plastic packaging, of which will likely triple by 2060, and with half hitting landfill. I think it's quite an interesting time to be talking about this kind of thing. So if we roll into, I suppose, question or topic one, then we can sort of see and get some input about what are the biggest sustainability struggles within your industry. I don't know whether anybody's got any particular points sort of straight away that they want to start the talk on.
Hi, so I just thought I'd jump on and explain a bit more about my role and how we kind of deal with the struggles of sustainability, it being quite a big word and quite a vague topic as well. So for us, as most of us all know, the kind of construction industry contributes to so many emissions. I think it's about 40% of greenhouse gases due to the construction industry. So we really wanted to kind of make sure we're transparent with our clients and our suppliers are transparent with us when we specify various products and materials from the very beginning of a project. So we send out a sustainability questionnaire, which I'm sure multiple different firms have their own. It's quite in depth. It's about 30 to 40 questions, and it looks at a supplier holistically. Sustainability is more than just the environment. Obviously, that's a big factor of ESG, but we really want to make sure we get to grips with who a supplier is and that they're like-minded, and we want to work with them and align with our goals and our clients' goals as well. So we ask them various questions based on where their manufacturing location is, what materials go into the products that they make, what ways are they looking to reduce waste reduction, for instance, or what are their carbon plan, but also looking at the company as a whole and what wellness initiatives they have for their employees and what may be their various different kind of policies in place there. So it's a very holistic view, and it means that we can be transparent and ensure that we're tackling sustainability head on and ensure the products that we specify really are the best that we can.
Quick question on that. Are you also looking up the chain as well? Are you talking to your clients, and if they're not interested in that route, are you changing your attitude to whether you're working with them or not?
So from the very beginning, we try and work out what they're trying to gain from the project, what their KPIs are, and how we can educate them as well. A lot of clients might come to us and they don't have the resource or education there. They actually there's a gap in the market there. I think that the more that we can share and include them from the beginning of the stage, they're happier to get on board. And that's why we like to get involved very early on at the beginning of the REBA stages. So we definitely encourage it. And I think one of our main USPs at Resonate is that we try and source as locally as possible. So we aim for 70% of the products that we specify within a 100-mile radius from site.
Right. Okay.
And that is something which clients really get on board with, and it's a story that they can kind of engage with, and their employees also like. So we look both up and down the chain,
Right.
but be as transparent as possible and try and do our best wherever we can.
Great, that's fantastic. I think there's a few other people obviously that want to contribute on this one as well. So perhaps Jo?
Great points by Venetia, and it sounds like your company's doing absolutely amazing things, and I think really well-rounded view on the E, S, and G in sustainability. My comments will, I guess, primarily focus on the E. My company manages helps a business measure and manage their carbon emissions, and carbon being the most well understood metric for your impact on the planet, which is your environmental impact. And I think one of the biggest struggles that, and I'm also not industry specific, that the entire country has to face is Scope 3. It by nature, and just I guess for knowledge setting in the room, in case we're not all sure what Scope 3 is, Scope 1 and 2 are your more direct emissions and the energy you consume in your office from the electricity grid. Scope 3 is everything else, which includes your supply chain, which I think Venetia really spoke to well with the form that they send out to their suppliers to ensure they're working with values aligned businesses. The challenge is measuring the emissions of those businesses and tracking that over time. It is incredibly difficult for businesses, and that's something that we and the whole world of carbon accounting is also trying to solve. And you'll have heard of sort of science-based targets, setting targets on engagement of your supply chain rather than just the actual emissions has become a best practice way of approaching it, due to the lack of control and influence that many of us as SMEs have over our supply chain. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we see in the industry, Scope 3 being incredibly important because it's about 80% plus of an SME's emissions normally.
Right, crikey, there's quite a lot to consider in there. All right, fantastic. Can we have perhaps move over to John? John, you've got some comments, I think, within this section as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's certainly great hearing from other sectors with similar type of challenges. The big struggle for us when it comes to, I'm kind of speaking from the built environment perspective here, and it comes from all the standards and tools that we in the built environment now have to not only be aware of, but very quickly become experts in. So to name but a few, we've got the likes of BREEAM, Fitwel, Well, Neighbours, Wired, Dream, SCA rating, NHS Net Zero Carbon Standard, the one for the UK, there's one for Scotland public sector buildings. And really what it can all come down to, and the struggle for us from a sustainable building perspective, is trying to get that paradigm shift in thinking away from the minimal viable product and kind of challenge that value engineering and focus on, as the comment is here, focus on the planet as opposed to focus on the distant future as opposed to the near future. So certainly when it comes to we had the old classic trade-off triangle, which was cost, speed, and quality. The struggle now is that triangle has become somewhat of a hexagon, which includes operational energy, then what Joe had just said there on embodied carbon, but also health and well-being of our users. And from an embodied carbon perspective, the struggle is getting from a building design perspective, getting people's mindsets away from operational energy. And heat pumps and solar panels are fantastic, but it's all the materials and supply chains and the extraction of those materials, the distance those materials travel, how those materials are maintained during the construction and build phase, and then all the end of life scenarios. I think the struggle now really is end of life scenarios, where what's going to happen to a lot of our building materials whenever they come to the end of their life.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to ask about is certainly from what I've seen in my time of working with companies such as yourselves within the built environment, is buildings maybe don't last as long as they used to, not from a point of view of they fall down, but from a point of view of them being refurbished or being knocked down to be rebuilt, where they could possibly be left for longer or repurposed. Or is that part of your design process? And probably Jonathan Harris will say something similar in terms of how you're trying to design buildings now for the future.
Absolutely. I think we've been retrofitting as a civilization. We've been retrofitting buildings since buildings existed. It's just now in the past 10, 15 years where that retrofit term has become a solidified term, as opposed to refurbishment or reuse or kind of revitalize or reinnovate. And because it's now becoming something that we have to not only tech seriously, but there's standards, there's targets, and there's lots of guidance and documentation out there. But again, with the net zero building standards that all kind of exist in little discrete areas, there's more than one way of doing it, and there's more than one way of getting it wrong, and that has shifting the thinking away from, right, okay, a building's coming near the end of its life, but can we retrofit it with something that will maintain its life? And the buildings we're designing right now, as you just said there, Dave, the buildings we're designing right now, today, about to be handed over tomorrow. What's the retrofit plan for those buildings? Like, is there enough design scope or space or flexibility in those buildings to allow for retrofit to happen?
Okay, interesting. Okay, Eliana?
I would say for video production, a lot of the barriers are cost barriers. Video production is really expensive, and budgets don't often allow for sustainable sourcing. And it's also an industry that doesn't really like change, which is quite difficult. But being in a small video business, I think my personal struggle was changing anything. You need to prove that it's worthwhile in the long run. So kind of proving how sustainability was a worthwhile investment and how it can have a positive impact both on the environment and cost savings in like the near and long term. And I'd say on a bigger scale in terms of bigger video productions, it's probably things like traveling and shooting overseas, and making sets that probably only have a one-time use. So I guess similar to what John was saying, where once you've made these big sets, sometimes you can't really do anything with them afterwards, so they're just disposed of. So it's probably finding a better way to create those bigger productions more sustainably.
Yeah, that was a question within, I suppose, my thought process was, I do have a friend who works making sets for TV production and films, and I often ask him, what do you do with it after that? And now, certainly in recent years, they're trying to repurpose as many of the materials from certainly framing and things like that, so that they can be reused again.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
So and travel, yes, I was going to ask about the travel side of things. Do you make videos all over the world, or do you try and keep it closer to home?
So most of what we do is within the UK and within London, but we have done some shoots overseas where we've just offset the carbon emissions cost for it. But it is something that we're looking into, and I guess in an ideal world, you'd find a local crew to shoot where you are. But then it's always the struggle where, you want to make sure that the work is up to your standards, and it's finding a good crew that you trust. So it is quite difficult.
Yeah, must be. Absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. And Jonathan Harris, would you like to say a few words on this point?
Yeah, absolutely, and great to hear the points already made, and just picking up on a couple of them, continuing that sort of conversation. I think obviously we're working in the construction industry, as we do as architects, and I think Venetia was talking about the impact of the construction industry, and I've got some stats here. 35-40% of all carbon emissions come from the construction industry, 30% of global waste, and nearly 50% of all extracted materials. And so it was architects and designers, having influence over that, and is a huge, or the potential to have influence over that is a huge responsibility, but also opportunity to do better. And to pick up on John's points rightly made about the sort of the dizzying, kind of number of terms and definitions of sustainability, and particularly around net zero, and getting clarity on that. And that really is a struggle. So, in terms of the construction industry, a lack of regulatory standards is one thing in our industry. So we're talking about net zero carbon buildings, but there was a zero carbon homes standard, for anybody that can remember that far back, in 2016, which was abolished by the coalition government at that time. And that's an illustration of where the industry really needs that consistency of policy and of standards, so that they can plan, make the investments and really get behind your policy. And that's been really lacking, I think. And also, again, John's point about clear definitions, and talking about net zero, and there's a number of multitude of net zero carbon, net zero ready, carbon neutral, And so currently there's no clear and single standard around net zero carbon, but fortunately that's something that's been worked on. There's a number of organisations, including the Green Building Council, who are pulling together a net zero building standard, which is due for release this year. So that's going to be really important for our industry and giving us that clarity and that that definition that everyone understands and can work towards.
Is it going to be self-policing almost up until that time? Are you just doing the best you possibly can given the information you have? Would you say that would be the case?
In some ways, it is, and I think and this goes probably to a conversation or a question that we'll be talking about later in greenwashing, and really, getting that clarity, and being sure about what everybody's talking about, and talking with a commonly understood,
fantastic.
and clear
Okay,
language.
Great. Thank you for that, Jonathan. And so just move into Vicky, if that's all right, to see what Vicky's thoughts are.
Yeah, no problem. And really interesting conversation so far, actually, and can relate to a lot of the comments that have been made. So there's been so much talk in the events industry post, obviously, pandemic and things like that, where everything was online, about how sustainable face-to-face events are. And now really all of our clients have gone back to face-to-face. There's a few hybrids, but predominantly it's all face-to-face, which of course brings with it lots of travel and working with different venues in different countries. So like Venetia, initially looking at our supply chain is vital for us in terms of what are the venues and hotels doing, what are their policies in each country that we're working in, and when we partner with AV and production, what are their credentials and what are their policies. So if a client wants to do a roadshow around a few different countries throughout Europe or something like that, how do we make that sustainable by moving the sets and being able to reutilize them in each venue that we're doing? So it's almost a bigger piece around making sure each venue has the same brief so they can reutilize the same sets. And then what we do with those post-event as well, whether they're going to do an annual tour or whether it's a one-off. So that links in much like John and Elena were saying as well. But more and more of the venues and hotel groups that we're working with in particular, really measuring their impact. So we're able to measure our clients' impact of events as well in turn. So for each event, we can track the impact through the venue, what the venue's offsets were, or what they've got in place compared to what we've done with travel and what we've done with our AV partners. So one of the big things we always do is source local. So whichever country we're in, we did an event in Poland in January. So it's making sure we're working with local providers for transportation, and making sure that we're bringing in local hosts and things like that. So the travel is easy and it's easier to offset in that environment rather than fly everybody over from the UK. With the production company we used, they had a local AV team that they worked with. We did fly in producers and show callers because they had the knowledge of the client. So it's trying to
minimize
work in exactly, that was the word I was looking for, trying to minimize the impact. And then of course when you're looking at food and so on, it's looking at, if you're having a buffet, trying to reduce the quantities you're ordering, maybe have more vegan and vegetarian options, but without taking away meat entirely, because obviously there's a big thing about going meat free at events because that's more sustainable. But then looking at the flip side, it's what about the local farmers and their market? So you have to look at it from all angles. And I think that's what's been really interesting this year in terms of where we've gone as a business, trying to think about what's best for our clients and and all of our supply chain and suppliers.
I mean, going back to a question I asked a little bit earlier on, how is this now affecting your decision making about which clients you are working with as well? I mean, are you getting to the point where you're saying no to people because they have no interest in what's further down the road?
We haven't done yet, but that is a question that we've been doing. So one of the processes we've put in place is over the last year, we've redeveloped all of our proposals. So when we're looking initially at an event with a client, it's when we put in for venues, it's being really strong in terms of making sure there's a section about what the sustainability policies are. So we're trying to educate and lead clients in that way in terms of, this is what the venue has in place, this is what they do. If they do this, can we do this across your events? And I guess it's not only sustainability we do this with, it's D&I as well with speakers. So we've got a piece in our proposals around making sure you're speaker lineup and hosts are diverse. You're not just having one category of people. So it goes in hand with, we're trying to cover, I guess, a lot of grounds in proposals, but when you get to actually present that to clients or you get into your first project meeting, that's something you can really have those discussions with. And we go with our clients to do all the site visits. So that helps us be able to educate and lead again. So if a client wants a particular venue, then at the moment we haven't said they can't have it, but it's then we work with them along the way to try and make that venue more sustainable.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great. From everybody, it's great to hear what people are trying to do. So if we can probably move on to one of the, I suppose everybody knows this term, greenwashing. How does it negatively affect businesses that are trying to make a real impact? So that's a little bit of a worry for us, even in Mustard, is what are we doing to sort of reduce our impact, but not make it just look like we're greenwashing the business to make it seem better. We're quite lucky in a sense. We don't actually produce anything, so we don't necessarily need to worry too much about that. So there's bits of travel, obviously, that we need to consider, and so on and so forth. But who would like to talk about this? I think Jonathan Harris, you sort of intimated towards a statement of greenwashing in your comments on question one. So I don't know whether you've got some words on this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is really a really important subject, isn't it? Because, in terms of everything that we're trying to do and all the businesses out there who are doing genuinely good work, I mean, this really is kind of scuppering slightly or has the potential to scupper, that good work, because it really is about greenwashing is about eroding consumer trust and hampering, those organizations that are doing good work, hampers their progress towards the sort of valid sustainability goals. So for us, in terms of architects, in terms of where we look in the supply chain, if you like, and specification, there are things that we can go to in terms of, I suppose, cutting through that greenwash and getting absolute clear, clear guidance and an understanding of a product. So those are EPDs, environmental performance declaration, and also life cycle assessments. So that's in terms of our sort of project work. In terms of our business and in terms of claims that we make through our marketing, it's so important that that we are honest and clear. So we have a responsible designs claims policy. So that defines the standards we adopt through our practice to ensure the claims that we make about our projects are fair, accurate, and sort of substantiated. And language is really important. So we've got a glossary of terms for our employees. So we discourage using sort of terms which are open to interpretation or misleading, like, for instance, green or environmentally friendly. So it's about when we are making claims about our projects that they're supported by evidence, whether it's certification or our own internal environmental management system standards, or environmental modeling, or building in use data and occupancy data, post-occupancy evaluation, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. And what have you seen? How has that changed for you in the last 5 years? As we've gone into the pandemic and then sort of come out, in terms of how buildings are being used moving forward.
Well, there has been. It's in terms of future forecasting and trends and so forth, it's a really hard one to say. I think obviously through the pandemic there was a huge change in how we used buildings, and people perhaps thought that those changes that they would then become permanent. I think we're now in a position where actually we have gone back in some ways, and we've already talked about travel and face to face and all those kinds of things. That we're now in a sort of hybrid world. It's important, in terms of how, for instance, we use our studio and how we design the spaces that we occupy. That's effectively, an exemplar to to our clients and to other businesses that come in and see us. So that we work in a hybrid way. We use hot desking, and we really make the space that we've got work extremely hard, so that it functions well as a workspace, but also provides that sort of quality of environment that our staff really appreciate in terms of sort of staff retention and morale within the studio. So that's really important too.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's important to have a good environment to work in. That is for sure. Gone are the days where it was just there's your table, there's your chair, aren't they? Okay. All right. Fantastic. Thank you for that, Jonathan. John, similarly within the built environment, obviously, what would you say about the greenwashing?
Yeah, absolutely. Just building on something that Venetia mentioned earlier on about the RIBA design and building stages earlier. What stage within that framework should we be talking about sustainability so that it's considered and considered more holistically and integral to the whole thing, as opposed to bolted on at the end? And I think that's where the danger of greenwashing can happen. If you bring the sustainability aspects and topics and decision making too far down the decision making framework, then it is just an afterthought and becomes a little bit like greenwashing. And then whenever you do have those discussions early on, as Jonathan had mentioned earlier, what do we actually mean when somebody says the word sustainability within a project? And over the past 20 years that I've been in sustainability and the built environment, the language has changed. It used to be green buildings, then it was environmentally friendly buildings, then it was energy efficient buildings, and then up until recently it was sustainable buildings, and now today it's net zero buildings. And historically, the built environment, way back at the start of the green revolution, kind of 2007-ish, buildings did suffer from that kind of negative connotation of greenwashing, because I had, sadly, in the course of my time in the industry, I've seen solar panels placed on north side of roofs. I've seen wind turbines put up near massive forests because it looks good, because people can see it from a motorway, or can see it on their drive to work, and that building site, that new housing development, that new building looks green because it has a shiny new toy. Bit of what we used to call green bling before it turned into greenwashing. But I think certainly now, of the past, I would say the past 5, maybe 6 years, I think within architecture we've really stomped that out in a big way, because facilities managers, end users, building occupants have taken on the terminology, the language, and the regulatory policies, and they want more from their buildings, and it's much harder for us and their spaces. It's much harder for people just to kind of slap something on and tick a box. It now has to be intricately designed. Not to say it doesn't still happen, but I think we're coming towards the end of that greenwashing area just now for the built environment.
Yeah. Do you think there is an element of, we don't want to be ageist in this. Do you think it might be age where people in these decision-making positions now are sort of younger, you might say, and it's very apparent that changes need to be made? Do you think that could be anything to do with it?
I think what you've commented on there, Dave, I think there's something there. I think what it comes down to is the software skills and the analysis tools that the next generation of young professionals coming out of university or coming out of college with, they've had much more uh, connection, exposure, and usability of these new tools and new software, which allows them to design spaces and buildings and projects in a much more streamlined, optimized way. Where even whenever I left university over 20 years ago and I was still doing energy calculations by hand, now there's a piece of software can do it in about 30 seconds. And if that's coming out with a newer generation, their thought process moves much quicker, and it's not a long, laborious, kind of difficult to crack nut anymore. It's now something that AI can kind of help us with.
Yeah. Oh, crikey, that's a whole different conversation, isn't it? Around everything, let alone this kind of area. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you for that, John. Joe, I think Joe, you've got some comments. And I love this term, green hushing.
I love John's term green bling. Wow, that's a new one. I've not heard that before. It's fantastic. Yeah, I think this one's a complex issue. We've got a really broad range of businesses in our community, and we hear about this topic from all different angles. I think there are always a few bad players out there that have made greenwashing be such a well-known thing, and the world of consumers then become confused by it and very apprehensive about believing any claims that businesses are making. So it does negatively impact those that are doing the right thing. And I think if you are one of those businesses doing the right thing, which most of us are, it's just figuring out the way to become confident and clear about how you communicate what you're doing. And there's a few key, I think, really key parts of that. And being really transparent about what you're doing and updating about the things that are maybe finding are hard, but also making success with, and the things that you've not achieved that you want to achieve. That's human, and that's great to hear. And that if you're authentic with that, I think that goes a really long way with both your investors, your stakeholders, your customers, and your supply chain. The other thing is backing up anything that you're saying with data. And I think John mentioned a few of the really generalized terms. They're kind of a danger zone, because no one really knows what exactly you mean by the word green, eco, sustainable. Like, what do you actually mean? Like, say what you mean on the tin, kind of thing. And back it up with data, and then if you can get that data third party verified, so you've got someone else's stamp to say you've basically had that fact checked and then audited, and that doesn't need to cost the earth. That is actually something that we do to help businesses communicate effectively. And it really does not need to cost the earth to have that tracking in place, and it holds you to account as well. And yeah, just such an important part of the communication, and helps you feel confident then as a company. And I think all the apprehension around feeling confident in that has led to the term green hushing, which was developed because businesses become so unsure of what to do that they say nothing at all. And my opinion really is that perfection is the enemy of progress. We're never, as a world, going to be perfect, hence why we're in the climate scenario that we are. And so it's incredibly important for everybody to share what they're doing, the good and the bad, and where they've let themselves down or missed a target, so that we can all learn from each other. Otherwise, this journey is going to be incredibly difficult if we're all doing it within our offices on our own and not talking about it.
Yeah, and not talking to anybody else, and so whether it's everybody running to the same sort of targets, or individual areas or divisions are at least collaborating and doing things positively, so that we can all learn. You're absolutely right. Okay, fantastic. Okay, I think can we move to Eliana at this stage as well? What do you think about this?
Probably the biggest bit of greenwashing is in the messaging on social media. There's not really many measures in place to make sure that what you're saying you're actually doing, compared to, for example, TV has really strict standards. For example, you're not even allowed to use the word sustainable in your messaging on TV because it is so vague, and you have to supply lots of reports and substantiation. But this isn't really the same with social media. So I think ultimately this causes a lot more damage, where people are buying products that they think might be more sustainable or are recyclable or made from recycled materials, when it probably isn't, and there's no one there to kind of fact check or supply those documents to prove it.
Yeah, that is big. I mean, with everything that, I mean, everybody sees it, don't they? But certainly with my kids on social media, and they see everything, and it turns out most of it comes from the same 2 or 3 websites that maybe we shouldn't be advertising on here. So that's for sure. Okay, yeah, interesting. Okay, and finally on this one, Vicky.
Hello there. Yes, so I think so good to hear from all the other speakers actually across all the industries about what they're seeing as well, and how actually that relates to our industry too. So I think just following on from all of it, it's just like the companies that or businesses that imply that they're doing more than what they are can actually create a bit of a boy that cries wolf effect, in terms of the companies that are making a real impact, are they not believed or appreciated anymore, because of everyone saying that they do comply to some degree. And I guess we're a little bit like yourself, Dave, in that we don't necessarily produce anything ourselves, but it's about working with our supply chain, and making sure we get certification, or there is a status, ISO or whatever, it is that says that those companies are credible and they are supplying.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you think certification is important in this area as well?
I do think it is. I mean, it's something that within our industry, there's a company called Greengage that we're working with. There's many suppliers, but I think as a team and as a company, I think there's just guidelines they take you through. There's discussion points we have to have as a business. There's things that we have to meet on a minimum level that help us make sure that our events are more sustainable for our clients. So I think that's really important for us. It gives us a guideline and structure, a bit like B Corp and things like that, to work towards.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to, that was certainly one. Obviously, we're on the path to B Corp, and it's really showing us how we need to not just evidence, but have the processes in place to make sure that we can manage everything that we need to from a point of view of moving forward. So yeah, good. Okay then. So 11:43 at the moment. Crikey, time's flying by. So number 3, how are you reducing the use of plastics? I suppose this is from a personal level all the way upwards. So who would like to start on this sort of area in terms of reducing your use of plastics? Does that include recycling to different areas? We as a company are Mustard, so I suppose most of the plastics that we have partly are waste from food packaging and so on. So we use a local recycler, but massive amounts of it within our tech, within our monitors and computers and everything else. So we use a local company to either reutilize for charitable foundations or make sure that everything is recycled out of ours. So, Venetia.
So we, touching back on our questionnaire that we send out, we take a huge time and thought into the products that we specify. So take plastics, for instance. We try and aim to specify products that do contain recycled content, and we like to be really clear, and we make sure that we're clear with our suppliers that recycled content, for those who don't know, can come in 2 forms: post-consumer and pre-consumer. Pre-consumer is often would be an offcut from the manufacturing process, so it hasn't actually had a life yet. Whereas post-consumer is something that has had a life and is then being reused. So touching on the kind of greenwashing question before, a lot of suppliers can say, oh, we have a product that is 82% recycled content, but that recycled content actually hasn't been used before. It's just an offcut from the manufacturing process. So it is, it can get quite difficult in terms of going down that line. But one of our suppliers is a company called Smile Plastics, and they're quite well known in the industry. And they will take things like used yogurt pots and white goods and turn them into a solid surface. So in terms of plastics, we do try and minimize our specification of plastics, whether that be just general plastic or through to kind of LVT and things like that. But when we do need to specify a plastic or a client would like that look, we do try and use recycled content to give a new lease of life to something which is already out there.
Right, fantastic. That's good to hear. And is there a huge cost implication in things like that? So when you're specifying, you said about the plastic worktops and so on, is that significantly more expensive than you would have found a few years ago when you weren't sort of going down this route?
I would say it depends on the supplier chosen, but naturally, I think most of us find being sustainable is at the moment more expensive, and it is trying to educate our clients to say why it's an investment worthwhile. We're always looking at ways how we can reduce that cost, and definitely is a factor we get to when our projects get value engineered, and the kind of sustainable ideas and fun products slightly get removed. So that is a difficult topic, but.
Yeah, and how do you fight to keep them in?
That's a difficult one.
What's your top
Very
tip?
difficult one. I think if we can explain the story behind the product, if a product has a particular interesting story and life cycle and something that really the client can resonate with and upholds their values, they're much more likely to keep it in. But it also talking about for a material, it would be kind of the embodied carbon, but also talking about the operational carbon of a project. So it's important to kind of look holistically at the whole thing. But it is a challenge, one where it's a constant daily battle, but it's an exciting one as well. It's nice to know you're making a difference and doing the best you can.
Absolutely, yeah, and we are certainly in a period of change in terms of making educating our clients about those things as well. Okay, all right, wonderful. Thank you for that, Vicky.
Yeah, so I think with events, obviously plastic, minimizing waste, printing is such a hot thing again for sustainability within the industry. So an event can actually have really negative feedback by attendees when you're doing debrief stage by the fact that they see it as not being sustainable. And as well at client debrief stage, if we're working with venues that haven't maybe delivered or partners that we're working with. So that's why it's so important for us and why we've changed our processes. So obviously there's some big wins that we can do. So some of them branding giveaways, all of that swag that's given. It's thinking about it in terms of longevity that maybe people can use it for. So if you're giving out a bag and you're branding it with the client logo and the colour of it, just make sure it's something that maybe people want to use personally afterwards, as opposed to something that's a bit garish in client colours. Or like recycled water bottles and things like that. So we're always looking at new eco-friendly projects that we could do. Very quite a lot in the tech space, I guess, at the moment, because people are definitely always looking for things like that. And moving on to that, digital is really the key in terms of signage, event signage, making sure it's digital. If venues already got screens in place, utilize them as much as possible with the agenda, with the speakers, with everything else, and use the main screen in your plenary and also breakouts. Also in terms of digital, it's thinking about using QR codes that can be used in so people can scan those as they enter a room to get the agenda, what the session's about, all the speakers. You can do so much with a QR code now, which is actually quite cost effective, more cost effective than an event app in some ways. But if you're doing a series of events, an event app is normally a very big investment. To some degree, there's a lot more cost-effective options now. But if you're doing a series of events, or you really want to think about continuity of your community before and afterwards, it's a great way to engage people, especially if it's got some sort of social element to it, or even gamification, which is also another thing. So yeah, it's just not having those plastic straws. Make sure you're using china or things that can be reused and rewashed.
Reused, yeah. And I mean, we don't want to get into the marketing sort of side of things now, but seeing what people do, with the QR code and where they're traveling to, where they're looking, and all of those kind of bits can be quite interesting data at the end of all of that. Okay. All right, wonderful. Thank you for that, Vicky. And then perhaps Jonathan Harris, have you got a couple of words on this one before we move on to number 4?
The things that we've already been talking about in terms of our business operations, for instance, here we get glass milk bottles delivered. Our coffee comes in a container that's then given back and reused by the supplier. Our business cards, I think, did have a plastic content in them, but now are all paper. But then, so from our side, again, being part of the construction industry, and the construction industry is I think the second largest consumer of plastics behind packaging industry. So plastics are really sort of omnipresent in our buildings, in all kinds of parts, and that has an environmental cost in terms of the manufacture and then end of life, health risks for the users. Many of the additives in plastics are toxic, and the impacts are unknown actually about a number of those additives. And then in terms of the plastic, it is petrochemical plastics, the carbon content in terms of the virgin raw material and also the manufacture. So for designers, it's how we can use less, how we can specify non-toxic, material plastics, for instance, non-plastic paints and varnishes, how we can use recycled content. And then interestingly, the things which have come into the sort of design world more recently, are things like specifying, for instance, in the office market, specifying furniture which is on a rented model rather than on a sales model, which encourages manufacturers to make products which are have a longevity about them because they'll be using them again and refurbishing them. Also specifiers which take back at end of life. So, for instance, there are carpet manufacturers that will take back at the end of use their carpets and recycle and reuse them. So those specifiers, and then designing for circularity and disassembly, and the plastic which is components and parts which are through our buildings, and composite materials, making them difficult to disassemble and recycle. And it's understanding that issue and specifying for disassembly at the end of a building life.
Yeah, that's a huge part of the recycling process, isn't it? Is can you get these things apart, or is it too difficult and they just end up in the landfill? So yeah, that has to be part of that design process, doesn't it? No matter what that thing is. Yeah, and I think the phones that we've all got in our pockets are guilty of being difficult to do that as well, aren't they? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So again, just conscious a little bit on the time side of things. So if we can move quickly on to number 4. How do we encourage other businesses to take the leap? So if this is right and this is revealed that 489,000 UK small businesses or small to medium businesses qualifying as green, what are we doing or what can we do to encourage other businesses to get to net zero? I think we've sort of put a line in the sand that we, as Mustard, would like to be net zero by 2030. So we've started that process in terms of being able to benchmark where we're at, and hopefully we can take a step forwards every month. But who do we want to start with here? Eliana, I think you wanted to make an initial comment.
Experience, it's showing people that it's not as costly or time consuming as it may seem. And as others have said, talking about it, sharing your knowledge, helping other people implement sustainable strategies. And then I think another key factor is trying to make it an important factor in decision making. So, for example, when we work with studios or location houses, asking them what their green credentials are and trying to get them to see that it's important for us when working with them. I'd love for a client to come to work with us and ask us what our green credentials are. And it's great to hear that that's some processes that the other guest speakers are putting in place as well.
Yeah, it does. Certainly does. It does seem to be a more common conversation that certainly all the consultants in Mustard are having with their client base is, where are they at and what are they doing about that process? So I think like you just said then, having it in the conversation is super important, that's for sure. Okay, thank you for that. Joe.
Hi, yes, building on that point from Elena as well. I think one of the key things is to get started is to understand where you're at today, have a bit of a baseline setting, I guess, meeting within your organization. What do you understand where you are today? And if you don't understand, get a bit of help to understand what your impact on the planet actually is today. That process of measuring your emissions can actually unlock a lot of insight as to where you should place your efforts. Otherwise, there can be a bit of a headless chicken sort of approach, and it feels very overwhelming. That measuring experience just prioritizes where you should take action, which I think with resource constrained SMEs is super important.
Yeah. And how do you start that conversation yourselves with your prospective clients or your supply chain?
The conversation around measuring emissions, is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It really isn't as hard as you think. The data collection needed to measure your emissions can take just a few hours if you get the right person engaged in that internally, and then using a company that can help you with that measurement. Trace does that. There are many others as well. We're specifically designed for SMEs so that process is approachable, easy, and affordable. And I think that's key. Getting yourself started, it's then snowballs from there. And internally, you can engage everyone in that process as well, which is super important.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much for that, Joe. And John.
Yeah, absolutely. Just Joe kind of took the words out of my mouth. Baselining, benchmarking, quantifying, and tracking is all the best way to get started. But the rewards now for taking that leap into sustainability is much more tangible, I think, now than it's ever been before. It can open doors to certain procurement opportunities, especially public contracts. If you're tendering or bidding for works, there always was a little section within proposals about, what is your building, what does your business do to keep green? And over the past 5 or 6 years, that the weighting for that particular question has gone up significantly. And I was once a co-founder and MD for a micro SME for about 3 or 4 years before we merged with Ryder Architecture. And it doesn't take a lot to be able to build up that sustainability portfolio in terms of your business and your practices and what you buy and what you do, that type of thing. And once you get it down on paper, you can start to get invited and be more successful in those lucrative procurement frameworks and bids and things like that. So there is more so than ever before, there's a real reason to do it. It's investment in terms of business development.
Fantastic. That's great. And I suppose all the businesses that we've got on this chat now are all probably in agreement that they are and we are trying to do the best we can and certainly move forwards. But hopefully other people can see and actually do the same thing. Okay. So that's the end of those initial sort of questions or statements that we had prepared. I don't know whether there's anything else that anyone would like to sort of comment on or sort of bring up or push as some positive action that we can take. Tegan has dropped in. Tegan, part of the Mustard team. How to make the call between balancing budget and sustainability? What's more important? It seems some of the more sustainable options are the more costly. And I think we just touched on that a little bit earlier on, didn't we? In terms of, how do you have that conversation? Anybody want to take a stab at this one for Tegan?
Hello there. Yes, really good question. And something we've been talking about as a team and with clients more and more recently, because there is obviously a budget that's in place for all of the events. And some of the options that I mentioned earlier, maybe if they're looking through an event app or something like that, there is a cost to it. Whereas if you do printing, it's probably less cost effective. So I think what we do is we talk to the client about what's more important to them in terms of longevity of the event life. If someone's holding an event and it's customer marketing or internal, what do they want the outcome of that event to be? And if it's to create a community or to create a response or a legacy or actions off the back of it, then investing in something that's going to be a bit more sustainable in terms of digital technology is often a really good place for them to be.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. And John Stinson, I think you've got a response as well.
Yeah, this is the type of question that's been plaguing our industry since solar panels became cheap enough, affordable enough. Since the price on solar panels came down to a point where it made it reasonably practical to consider, they've never really been that cheap. So the return on investment has been a big one for us. And it's a term that we've always kind of riled against because no one calculates a return on investment on a fridge or a microwave or a vacuum cleaner, but we're so paranoid about calculating return on investment in external wall insulation or heat pumps and things like that. It's the way you balance that off tends to be through government incentives. And if there is a government incentive that's pushing things like renewable heat or renewable energy or EV kind of charging, things like that, it does make the conversation almost go away. But whenever certain technologies are left on their own, it is always going to be an issue, and it's going to be that how much energy will you save in terms of utility bills. That's kind of how we tend to get around it.
Yeah, I think is that the only kind of return on investment you can have with a solar panel, though, I suppose, on that side. Yeah, okay. All right. And then who else would like to come on? Eliana?
Yeah, I think for us, oftentimes budget wins, unfortunately. But with the budget, it's finding options that work that, are often cheaper than For example, purchasing outright, like renting props or wardrobe, or hiring people who work more sustainably, like stylists who purchase secondhand, things like that. But also, we like to contextualize the impact so that when a project is over, they get a little report of how much carbon the project produced, so that they can see where they could go better next time around, or maybe try more sustainable options.
Fantastic. That's great. And then I suppose last comment on this one, if that's okay, Jonathan Harris.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly right. There is a cost. There is a capital cost in sustainability measures. For instance, in terms of sort of climate-ready buildings, I think they say that it's a premium of 6% for offices and 3.5% for residential buildings. But it's understanding how that's offset by the long-term value, which is, of course, as an example, with the office market, increased rental premiums and occupancy. And then, in terms of further down the line, you're not involved with costly retrofits, in terms of the changing climate targets. And, so for instance, in Bristol, we know that there's a demand for which outstrips supply for office space with the highest sustainability credentials. And at the same time, there's a surplus of, if you like, brown office space, which doesn't have that, which doesn't have that credentials. And as John was saying, we're at the moment of time, and the price of these technologies and sustainable solutions is continuing to fall. And against that, the price of fossil fuels is continuing to rise. And I think as designers, if we do our job properly, then obviously the point is to be using less of everything, and that's sustainable in itself, and of course it is also equally hopefully cheaper
in the long run. Hopefully, absolutely right. Okay, and then there's a question in from Joseph. Does the complexity of regulation affect the incorporation of sustainable approaches in SMEs to not only construction but the whole life cycle of operation, and what can be done to simplify these regulations, or is there any resolution for this? So Jonathan, you're still on, so you're still in the hot seat there. What do you think about the complexity of regulation?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the point we were talking about barriers and struggles within, in terms of sustainability, and the regulation and the lack of clarity. And so I think we're in a period of change, where the understanding of these terms, and of what we need to do and how that's captured in standards and regulation, we're getting to a point where that is becoming clearly defined. And I think that's going to be a real step change, certainly for the construction industry. We were talking about the net zero carbon building standard earlier, which will mean that we can all, as an industry, get something behind a single thing which we all, clearly understand, and hopefully can deliver.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think we'll run on. Obviously, we've run slightly over in terms of time, so we'll just quickly nip into the last area here. How can we take action? So what are we doing as businesses? Sign the Global Plastics Treaty, implement new initiatives from carbon offsetting to tree planting, work with a sustainability partner to help identify sticking points of problems to solve. So I don't know what people think on this sort of side of things. We as, again, Mustard touched on it earlier, we have started the process to become a B Corp certified company. So we're looking at all elements of our business, supply chain up and down, and how we deliver things. So that's certainly where we're at, and that will include some carbon offset in the process as well. So I don't know what else, any other comments that people might have sort of on this, or what other things that we could be doing.
I think this has been said quite a bit throughout the talk, but just share your knowledge, help people out, ask questions, tell everyone what you're doing, so that people who might not know how to do it, at least they'll find a place to start. And I think having this conversation is really important, because it's only going to benefit everyone in the long term. We shouldn't be trying to hide any of this knowledge.
No, that's it, isn't it? It's about being transparent in this process, that's for sure. And that's what we're finding out, is it's really helping us to look in the mirror as much as anything else, and have a conversation with ourselves before, just shouting out into the internet and into at the other end of the phone, tell people about what we're doing. Absolutely, totally agree. Fantastic, thank you. And John Stinson.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of being bold, challenging supply chains, taking a look at what your peers are doing within your own sector, and saying, well, how can we do better than that? I think Joe had made a perfect comment earlier, which is perfection is the enemy of progress. I love that. Make mistakes quickly and find a way of doing it that suits the business. And I think in terms of recruitment as well, like there's a huge amount of skills and kind of groundswell happening within the kind of recruitment area just now. There's loads of people out there who have these skills to make the kind of challenge the norms and to think outside the box, and bolstering your staff with people like that can really help to consider alternative ways to make this sort of happen and get there.
Do you think there is do you think there's a change that has to happen in the boardrooms of some of the businesses that are doing the hiring to allow those people in?
Potentially, it is something I am seeing more often, and it comes back to a point I made earlier, where at the boardroom, top of one of the top points on the agenda is going to be, what's our pipeline look like? Where's the money coming from? And for lots of large organizations, the money comes from large procurement frameworks and being on public sector or private sector procurement frameworks. And a big part of that is having a really good response on your sustainability strategy. And the sustainability strategy can come in two ways. It's what do you do in your business to make it more sustainable, and what can you do for our business to make us more sustainable? And that is now making that conversation more prevalent and prioritizing that conversation by bringing people in with the right sustainability skills, both in the business and on the business, to drive that forward, to take action.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yeah, totally agree. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. So unless anybody else has got any further comments on this sort of section, we'll wrap it up now. So firstly, thank you very much to all the guest speakers. And then secondly, thanks to everybody for joining live on LinkedIn today. Thank you very much.